Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Phoenix Wisdom Podcast. I am your host, Janet Sandberg, and today we are joined by Jeremy George. Welcome, Jeremy. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Janet. Very excited to be here. I've heard a couple episodes. I love how you approach what can be a very difficult topic and you normalize the discussions. Excited to be here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, normalizing the discussion. That's exactly what the whole podcast is about. And
Yep.
my particular advocacy for mental health is just, we got to talk about it and get rid of the stigma around it. And you're doing the same thing by sharing your story, and and you have a TED Talk and everything. So start by introducing yourself, and then we'll get into all the other stuff.
Sure. So so Jeremy George, I live in San Diego, California with my partner and our dog. I'm a TEDx speaker, as you mentioned, and I'm the founder of a company called Bucket Match, which we can get into a little bit later on. And outside of that, I'm just a huge advocate for speaking on mental health issues, specifically suicidal ideation. And so it just felt so natural for me to come on to a podcast like this one.
Yes. Awesome. You have a very interesting story. And I just love how you've turned those difficulties into something good and something that will help other people. So let's get there. Let's go back to the beginning. Tell us what was going on when you were experiencing suicidal ideation.
Sure. So the first, the poignant moment that I remember, April 2019, I very rapidly fell into this sensation that was very visceral. Like, it wasn't just in my head. I felt it in my body that I no longer wanted to be here. And I think it was accumulation of a lot of things. But in the moment, I thought, okay, that was strange. This will pass. And then every single morning I woke up and it was still there. And for about a year, I struggled with suicidal ideation. I didn't actually know that term at the time, right? So it's actually really helpful to label your feelings in such a way. It kind of removes you from the feeling, and it helps you to say, okay, this is a thing. It's not who I am. But and you know, it's funny because I was living in New York City at the time. I had hit all these milestones that I thought were supposed to make me happy in my career, in my finances, in my living situation, my relationships. I think on the surface, I felt like I should be happy, right? I was doing all the things that I was supposed to do, quote unquote, and I wasn't happy. And I think that's what really perpetuated into this, like, if I can't be happy with this, is happiness even attainable? And so in 2019 through early 2020, I questioned whether or not I would ever be happy, or if I would always just be chasing after these other goals. And that led me to believe that life was meaningless.
Yeah.
You know, when you don't believe there's any reason for you to be alive, it becomes really hard to want to stay alive. Now, I want to be very clear, because I think my perspective may be different from other folks. I was never actively suicidal. I never attempted it.
Yeah.
Largely because I was afraid that it would seem weak. I remember thinking that I would hope I would run into, a burglary happening, or I would run into some big traumatic event where I could jump in and be the hero and die that way. That was the way that I wanted to go out.
Oh, wow.
I didn't want to take my own life. And so it's sort of ironic that it was because of this stigma that I had around mental health. That's actually what saved me. But now I want to, of course, help correct that notion, because it's not weak to feel that way. It's a natural, it's not a natural thing, but it is something that happens. And there are also natural ways to get out of it.
Yeah, there are. And a lot of people, guests on the podcast and listeners of the podcast, we have suicidal ideation, but that can range from anything to just wishing to not wake up tomorrow to, actually attempting it. It's that whole span of thoughts and feelings and sometimes actions. But it's just the general underlying tone is, I don't want to keep living this life that I'm living.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. And which for you on the outside looked fantastic, right? Was that hard? Did you talk about it at all? Did your friends know that you were, not feeling it?
In the moment, no. Okay. When my TEDx talk came out, that was the first time that almost everyone that I know personally found out that I was even going through this struggle. And it's really too bad that I think for a lot of us, we often find it harder to open up and reveal this vulnerability to the people we're closest to. I found it easier to share this with complete strangers, right? The first person I told was my doctor, and she referred me
Good.
to a few professionals. So I didn't know that I had to open up about it. And the reason for that is actually I had a friend who took his own life. And I remember, and I just remember being so frustrated that he didn't speak up. And I knew I didn't want to make that same mistake. So I knew that I had to talk to somebody, right? I didn't have the courage at the time to open up to my closest friends, but I knew that I had to speak about it before it got worse. And I'm really grateful to Alex, my friend who took his own life, that he was able to teach me that lesson.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's hard, but it happens, and I'm glad that you learned something from him and his story and his choices.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um
absolutely.
so okay, so you were 19, feeling like you didn't want to be here, life sucked. Life didn't suck, but you felt like it sucked, you know. And I
Yeah.
totally get that. Like you have all the things that, you're ticking off all the boxes and you're like, but I'm still not happy. Like what did you do?
And I think that's an important topic to really address because there are, of course, so many different reasons and catalysts that can put you into this mental state. And I think a lot of people, when they feel like on the surface, they don't have any reason to feel this way, they're almost
Mhm.
ashamed of it, right? Or they don't
Yeah.
want to express that because there's no obvious reason, right? I wasn't in financial stress. My relationship was fine. I had, an abundance of things that I could want to have. And I think that's what made it all the more challenging was how do I reconcile that with this feeling of like life is meaningless? And so I started to genuinely believe it's impossible to be happy. I have things that should make me happy and they didn't. And so, one thing that I hope to communicate to folks listening here and anywhere else is that going through suicidal ideation doesn't necessarily mean that you're sad. In my case, it sort of just meant that I was numb. It was truly this
Mhm.
feeling like life has no meaning and it doesn't matter what I do, was a sensation that I had. And so I think if you're feeling that way, I hope that you feel comfortable recognizing that that is a form of suicidal ideation,
Mhm.
and that it is good to get help and to chat with people. And I have a whole list of here's like the 10 things to do, which we can get into. But I think the first step is just recognizing that that's okay too. Even if you have
Yeah.
everything and you're still sad, there's no shame in that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really important. You're actually the second, and I have no idea if this is a guy thing more than a girl thing
Interesting.
to, but yeah, one of my recent guests, his episode hasn't been published yet, but kind of the same situation, he was doing all the things and ticking all the boxes and making all the money. It's just like, what is this it?
Yeah, it's
So,
a good distinction. Yeah, I don't know if I don't know the science behind it, but I wouldn't be surprised if I do think men tend to put a lot more pressure on ourselves, in different ways, of course, right, than women
mhm.
do, and because of that, we have different mental struggles. Men tend to hide it, and I was certainly one of those people. I hid my struggles for a long time because I thought it was weak.
Right. And then what shifted?
Sure. Well, so at the end of 2019, my mom went in to get back surgery. I was living in New York at the time. My parents are in the Bay Area. And I get a call from my dad the next morning saying, "Hey, Jeremy, mom is in the ICU. She's gone into cardiac arrest.
Oh my
And
gosh.
we don't know if she wakes up, if she will be brain dead or if we'll be able to communicate." And so, of course, I hopped on the first flight I could back home. And I remember on that flight thinking, kind of beating myself up because here I was wishing to be dead, right? Wishing to no
Mhm.
longer be on the planet. Meanwhile, my mom is sitting in a bed in a hospital fighting for her life. And that really crystallized for me the fact that life actually is beautiful and it is something to fight for. And so, on that flight over, and thankfully there's a happy ending to this story. My mom, she did survive. She actually made a full recovery. She's out,
Amazing.
she's walking, she's working. And as my dad likes to say, we're fortunate that we got the lesson of how fragile life can be without the
Yeah.
consequence because my mom is still here. So
Yeah.
that was the turning point. And then COVID happened, right? And I think everyone was forced to reconcile with the fact that life really can be flipped upside down in any moment. And then I
Mhm.
got laid off from my job 3 months later due to a COVID layoff.
Oh
And
my
so it was
gosh.
sort of this series of events that happened where I felt like so much was out of my control. It really
Mhm.
forced me to think about what is within my control, right? Let me
Yeah.
take back my own enthusiasm for life, my conviction for why I want to be here. And that's when I turned to my bucket list. And so, what I realized was that in pursuit of all these sort of vanity metrics, if you will, the career, the money, et cetera, I was
Mhm.
neglecting a lot of other things that I wanted to experience or at least try while I'm still on this planet, right? And I realized that I should just do those things and see what happens. And so what I ended up doing was, instead of getting another job, I decided to just spend a year deliberately going after these things on my bucket list. I called it the What a Year project because I hoped that by the end of the year I could look back and say, wow, what a year, right? And the rest is history. It was truly a transformational experience for me. I had an opportunity to give a TEDx talk about that experience, as you know. And what really surprised me was just the sheer volume of messages I got from friends, but also complete strangers, right? Describing a very similar sentiment, feeling like they're just kind of floating through life, but they weren't like deliberately going after the things that they thought they wanted. And that's when I realized like there is a much bigger problem here, right? And we're just
Yeah.
not exposing it, and we're not discussing it. But I think on some level, almost everybody feels that.
Yeah. Yeah, there is that piece missing. And I know I've mentioned this a million times, and any regular listeners are going to be like, I know you've said this already. A coach that I worked with, like probably a decade ago, one time was like, asked, what brings you joy? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. Joy? I don't know what joy is. I don't know what brings it. I don't know how to feel it. Like, you know, we're not, sadly, we're not taught and we're not encouraged to have those experiences, even if they're just little things like turning on music when you're folding your laundry, is one way, but also making time for those bucket list things. It's a weekend here or there, or, and I'm sure you have big things and small things that could be ticked off pretty quick, or it's a larger undertaking and involves some travel or something.
And that's a great call out, because I think when a lot of folks hear the term bucket list, they immediately think of all these like epic travel and adventure and these big things. And certainly that should be on anyone's bucket list, right? If that matters to you, if that's something you want to experience. But I think, if you think about the true definition of a bucket list, it's just anything that you want to do before you die. And for me, I did have those big things, right? I did go skydiving, sort of the classic bucket list item. I did try to go see the Northern Lights. I cliff jumped in Hawaii, but I also did a bunch of silly things. I dyed my hair because I was just curious what I would look like. I wrote a rap and, I recorded it in a studio. I learned how to play guitar, and I played in front of a live audience. So, things to get over that fear. I think if you really confront mortality and you think about, when I'm at the end of my life and I'm looking back on what I want to do, there was a study done at, I believe, at Cornell University, found that 76% of people, when they're in hospice or at the end of their lives looking back, will regret the things that they didn't do, not the things that they did. And often I think as a society, we tend to hold ourselves back from really pursuing our most authentic selves. And so to me, that's what a bucket list actually is it's a reflection of my most authentic self and who I want to be. And the last thing I'll say on that is, something that's been really, I've been privileged as the founder of Bucket Matches. And Bucket Match is a platform where people upload their bucket lists and we help you accomplish those goals. I've been able to get a unique perspective into what are the types of things that people want to do, right?
Yeah.
And it's,
You get
of
to see
course,
everybody's bucket lists.
yeah. And it's cool because there are some things that for someone would feel so small and mundane and easy to do, like I could do it any single day. But for someone else, it's like the biggest thing, and there's this huge hurdle holding them back. And that's what I love about the idea of bucket lists and sharing bucket lists, is that I think we all can help each other deliberately pursue our most authentic selves.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Always have like 10 million questions that come into my head at the same time. But what kind of things? You mentioned a few things. What was the easiest thing on your bucket list to cross off?
Oh, that's a good question. I wanted to do a good deed every single day for 30 days. That was actually a relatively, well, I should say that was a very simple one. It wasn't always
Right.
easy, but a very simple one, right? Just wake up every day and just go do something nice for somebody. Give someone extra change, hold the door open for someone walking into the coffee shop, whatever it is. So that was, I think, probably the one that I think that was actually the first one that I tried to attack on my bucket list, because I was like, I know I can do this. There's nothing that's going to prevent me from doing it. I just have to do it. Yeah.
Right. Right.
And What was great about that is you start to learn how just engaging with your community. I think going back to mental health, it's hugely gratifying to actually interact with other people around you in a social way. And I think, especially
Mhm.
if you are struggling, one of the best things you can do for yourself, if you're able, is to get out and actually help someone else, which may
Yes.
seem so counterintuitive when you're like, I can barely take care of myself. But there is an incredible phenomenon that happens when we as human beings engage with our society and we actually help other people and we feel that warmth in return. And I promise you, it will help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think might have been last week's podcast, Dr. Rob Kelly. And one of the things that he said was to just, compliment people
Yeah.
and how much a simple compliment, which goes along with the doing something kind for somebody, doing that every day. And I was in the thrift store earlier today and I saw this guy and he's got this great oversized sweater on and it's just cats like all over different shapes and colors and I'm like, that is a great sweater, and he just like he lit up and smiled and he's like, "Oh, thanks. I got it in a different thrift store." And now I'm always looking for cat sweaters. And, we had a little conversation, but it totally changed, like Dr. Kelly said, the people you compliment, it changes them. They smile, they stand up straighter, they feel a little better about themselves. So, and it
Absolutely.
helps us and it helps them. And
100%. That's the
it's,
beauty of it.
but you
There's,
got to leave your house.
you got to leave your house. You got to leave your house. You got to interact. Give someone a smile, give them a compliment like you did. And it's an amazing thing because both people benefit from it. There's very few things in this world that you can give someone else where you also gain. But a
Yeah.
compliment is one of those things.
Yes. Yes. What about dyeing your hair? Like why was that on your bucket list and why hadn't you done it before?
So frankly, I guess I'll start with the why hadn't I done it? I hadn't done it because I've always worked in corporate settings. And I
Oh,
think for
okay.
whatever reason, it's not that there was ever a policy where the company said it, you can't dye your hair. But I was always sort of, I'm on the business side of things. So I'm never behind a computer. I'm always in front of my clients, in front of my employees. And so I just sort of had this belief that it wouldn't make me look as professional. And so I
Interesting.
always wanted to do it, but just never did. And I think the reason I wanted to is purely out of curiosity. I always thought it looked cool and I figured, why not, right? Why not
Yeah.
just give it a shot and sort of see how people, if people would even treat me differently, right? Would people see me as less professional and so
Hmm.
forth? And it was a really just fun kind of real life experiment for me.
What color did you go?
I just went with blonde, like bleached blonde.
Okay,
I've got a
so
picture of it on my website, so I can show you. They
cool.
did a fantastic job. I was really, really pleased with it.
Cool. For those people who are listening and can't see, Jeremy has like really dark brown hair.
Yeah, it's
Blonde
very.
is the very opposite.
I will say, once my roots started growing out, it just the stark contrast of this like dark black hair against this bleach blonde. That's when I was like, all right, I think it's time to go.
Right. So what made you then go from like, okay, I need to feel more. I need to feel good. I need to feel more fulfilled. So I'm going to do the things that bring me joy. Bucket
Mm.
list. How did you go from that to like, I want to help other people complete their bucket lists?
Yeah. Well, I heard you say this on another episode actually, which is I think when generally when folks go through these sort of mental crises and they come out on the other end, there's just like this natural instinct to want to share with other people. And I think it's because you're so familiar with the pain and
Mhm.
because you know that it's possible to get out of it. You don't want anyone else to go down a different path. You just sort of have this natural desire to help people out of it. And for me, that was certainly there, right? The question was just how, right? I know what I want. I want to help people. The question is, how do I do it? And once this TEDx talk came out about me going off and trying to do a bunch of things for my bucket list without any end goal in mind, to see the reaction from folks, I realized that a lot of people just need a little bit more structure to thinking about how do I actually live a life that is deliberate for me, that
Mm.
isn't based on society's measuring stick for what success looks like. And candidly, it starts with the end. And so what I mean by that is I mentioned before, 76% of us at the end of our lives will regret the things we didn't do more than we did.
Mhm.
And when you're at the end of life, when you're on your deathbed, it's really clear and obvious to you, right? Like, man,
Yeah.
these are the things I should have done, right? But when we're so alive, it's hard to put yourself in that position. Having gone through suicidal ideation, I was in a unique position where I was healthy, financially stable, yet I still felt like I was on my deathbed in a way, right? I wasn't
Mhm.
actually going to die, but I was worried that at some point, because my brain would go through these waves where sometimes I was like, yeah, I should just do it. And then there were other times where I was like, no, that's not me. But I did have that fear that if the negative side took over, I might be the one to take my own life. And so I was basically on my deathbed, even though I was healthy. And so I feel really privileged because I've had an opportunity to go there mentally without physically taking action. And that's allowed me to have much more clarity on what I need and what I want in life. And candidly, I think when I tell people it starts with death, it can feel a little bit morbid. I actually find it to be incredibly empowering because when you remove all of the other distractions, it becomes a lot easier to know what actually matters to me. But it
Yeah.
does take sort of a spiritual journey for you to really put yourself in that position. And it can be scary. But I think if you come out of it, it's really empowering.
Yes, yes. And it can be scary. And those dark nights of the soul, as some people call them,
Yeah.
where we're like, this is it. What we're kind of like one way or the other. I need to make a decision. It's like hitting that rock bottom. You're like,
Yeah.
am I going to keep down this path that has brought me here? And the answer is always no. Like I'm at the bottom. Like I can't do this again. I can't keep doing this. Something has to change. And then it's figuring out what those changes are and what you need to feel better, what you need to create change in your own life. It's those little change. But I love the word that you used, which was deliberate, living a deliberate life and not just going through and being steered by either what other people are thinking we should be doing and the decisions we should be making, the good job and the nice car and the big house and all of those things relative to our financial situation, but those are always the goals. And I remember talking to somebody one time and they're like, but I don't want to buy a house. Like I don't want that responsibility.
Totally.
I'm happy to rent for the rest of my life,
Yeah.
and leave all the repairs to somebody else, And but if you then feel like you're forced to buy a house even though you don't really want to, then you start feeling trapped, right? Even
Exactly.
though it looks good on the outside, but if it's not what you really want and doesn't align with who you are and your authentic self, then you're gonna be unhappy. So it's those
Absolutely.
those deliberate choices to create the bucket list life.
Yep. Yep. And that's exactly where I was. And I don't want to gloss over how hard it can be, especially when you're in the depths, right? To even think
Mhm.
like, what do I want, right? I'm barely surviving every single day. How can I even dream? And I get that question a lot, right? Which is like,
Yes.
I don't have a bucket list, Jeremy. I'm just trying to survive every single day. And I get that.
Mhm.
And what I would suggest is to, again, remove this notion that a bucket list is anything epic or big or even a dream. It is purely what do you want to do before you die? Because once you die, that's it, right? I mean, it depends, I
Mhm.
guess, your religious affiliation, but your physical existence as
Well,
it is today,
this life that we have
this
now,
life,
regardless of what happens afterwards,
right?
this one's done.
Over. And I think, I was listening to one of your earlier episodes where the gentleman was going to take his life, but he didn't because his phone was dead and he wanted to tell his wife, I think, something like that. And he didn't have a chance to message her, which is why he didn't jump off the bridge. And that led him obviously to still be alive today. What I heard was that before he took his own life, he wanted to communicate with his wife. That was something that he would want to do. So from my perspective, that is something that is on his bucket list, is he wanted to inform this important person to him. And so that's why I think it's so important to just start writing and don't worry about what you're writing. Just write down your list, put it on a piece of paper, do it in a private space if you don't want anyone to see, but just write and don't worry about
Mhm.
what you're writing. Keep writing, let it all out on paper. That's the first step to gaining clarity. And then what I always subscribe is to try to catalog your dreams in a way. So writing them down is massively helpful. But then when
Mhm.
I say catalog, what I really mean is sort of breathe some life into what those objectives are, right? Start asking yourself, why does this even matter to me? If you're able, pull together pictures, videos, anything that will help give you a little sense of inspiration around like, what is this thing that matters to me? And then the step after that is to create pragmatic and objective parameters around it. And when I say objective, it just means I can definitively say, yes, I did it, or no, I didn't. So an example might just
Oh,
be, for a
yeah.
while, I just wanted to know that I went outside, right? I went outside for a 5-minute walk. I either did it or I didn't. I didn't focus on staying alive and like, being excited about the future. Cause to me, I was like, that's so far away, right? But I did focus on just get your ass outside for 5 minutes a day.
Yeah.
And then eventually you build off of that. So those would be my recommendations for anyone who's really in the depths of it and feels like, Jeremy, I can't dream about my bucket list, right? That would be my suggestion.
Yeah. And like you said, normally we think of bucket lists as these big trips or, things that require a lot of time and money but it's not, maybe you want to write more poetry, you know, and
Exactly. Yes.
and that's you don't even have to publish it. It doesn't even have to be like that type of dream. It's just I want to write more poetry. So you write a poem every day or at least work on one every day,
Yeah.
and it's those types of things. You don't want to get to that point and be like, oh man, I wish I'd spent more time, exercising my creative brain.
Right.
And
Absolutely. That's a great
and
example.
even if it just ends up being a stack of papers in the corner of a room, it's for you, it's not for other people. If
Yeah.
publishing is part of what you want that to be, that's great. But,
Yeah.
it's for you, and I think that's the important thing to stress about the bucket list. It's just for you.
Absolutely.
Cool. What advice would you give to somebody who is in the depths right now and is, dreading waking up tomorrow?
Yeah. Two things that I did that were really, really helpful for me, right? And so everyone interprets and internalizes these emotions differently. What I did was every morning when I woke up, I would write down what I was thinking. And the reason I did that is I found it to be really, I was able to distance myself a little bit from my thoughts when I would put it on paper. So instead of keeping it, marinating in my head, because there was a period, this was a very strange period. There was a period for about like 3 weeks where I woke up and every single day, the first thought that I had was the word suicide. I don't actually know how that happened, but I remember distinctly every single day, the word suicide, not necessarily that I want to, but just the word would
Yeah.
pop up.
It's
And
the
so I just
concept.
started, just the concept of it. Yeah. It was clearly just on the forefront of my brain. So I
Yeah.
started writing it down immediately with, again, no objective in mind, just get it on paper. And like I mentioned, what that really helped me with is it allowed me to separate myself from my thoughts and recognize that these are my thoughts, but they are not who I am. And so
I
that
love
allowed me
that.
to
Yeah.
also realize that I can beat them, right? I can change them. And then the second thing, really helpful for me, and I think this actually saved my life in many ways, was to try to do something active with other people. And I should be very clear. So for me, playing soccer was always a big passion of mine. When I would go and play soccer with my friends during this period, that was the first time that at the end of the soccer game, I would realize, wow, an hour just went by and I didn't think about ending my life. And
Yeah.
that just gave me the hope that it was possible, right? It was possible for my brain not to think about this. And I sort of, in a very abstract way, said, well, if I could just play soccer 24 hours a day for the rest of my life, I will never think about ending my life. Now, of course, that's not possible, but I knew neurologically that means there's something I can do to change the way my brain is wired. And what I realized is it was when you're interacting in a physical environment with other people. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, I love to run. The reason running isn't going to help you as much is because although it is a physical activity, and that is great, it's not with other people. So you're not as present. You're able to, and I think we all experience this, you're able to kind
Get
of
lost in your
get
thoughts.
lost in your thoughts. Exactly.
Hmm.
So what you need is tennis, ping pong, volleyball, soccer, basketball, any kind of, or even just playing games, right? But something where there are other variables immediately in front of you that your eyes and your brain need to be paying attention to. That's where the neuroscience kicks in and says, we're not going to worry about ending our lives because a ball is going to hit me in my face. So let me block that ball first.
Yeah. I love that. Great. Great things. And I love asking this question to people because I always get a different
I'm
answer.
sure everyone, yeah, exactly. Which is the beauty of it. You have a really unique perspective into how people, found a solution for themselves. And I think it is unique and different for everybody.
Yeah. And it will continue to be that way. Whatever worked for you may not work the same way for somebody else, but even just, you know, reperspectivizing a little bit and being like, well, that doesn't really sound great to me, but something, three steps away from that is something that I'm like, oh yeah, that's fantastic. I can do that.
Totally, totally. And yeah, there's a common theme in all of these things, even if it's not the specific action, there's something underlying everything that allows us to get out of that dark place.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here today, Jeremy. I'm currently
Yeah.
being blinded by the sun coming in through my window. So this conversation has opened up the heavens too.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for having me, Janet. Like I mentioned, I'm just so grateful that folks like you are approaching this conversation in a really, I think, graceful way, and just bringing knowledge and advice and perspective, and as I mentioned, normalizing it. It's really important. So, thanks for having me.
Good. Thanks for being here. Thank you for listening. Remember that you are loved, you are worthy, you are valuable, you are meant for more, and that it really does get better. If you are in crisis, there are numbers that you can call or text to get the help that you need. That information for Canada and the US is in the description below each episode. If you are in immediate crisis, please call 911. We love you, and I hope you'll listen again.